Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, as emergency crews rush to contain catastrophic wildfires around Los Angeles, residents come to grips with the devastating loss.
It's a really paralyzing time right now. You don't really know which way to go.
A judge gives Donald Trump no punishment during sentencing in the hush money case that led to the president-elect's 34 felony convictions.
And National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan reflects on his time in the Biden White House and weighs in on the incoming Trump administration's unconventional foreign policy tactics.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation, the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Firefighters are making some progress in the battle against a series of catastrophic wildfires around Los Angeles. But new blazes have popped up and more than 10,000 structures have been damaged or destroyed.
At least 10 people have been killed, and there's still more danger ahead, with winds expected to pick up once again this weekend. California Governor Gavin Newsom said the state will conduct an inquiry into the many questions about water supply that left some hydrants unusable. Stephanie Sy begins our coverage with this on-the-ground report.
Winds started to ease today, giving firefighters a window to continue making progress on fires that burned for a fourth day around Los Angeles. The Eaton Fire northeast of the city and the Palisades Fire to the west are the largest, but others have continued to pop up, including the Kenneth Fire in the San Fernando Valley. That fire prompted evacuations last night and burned about 1,000 acres before firefighters brought it under control overnight. Officials warn more than 57,000 structures remain at risk. L.A. Mayor Karen Bass defended the city's response.
We are doing everything we can to bring the situation under control, and success has been reported. That is our number one job, to protect people's homes, to protect people's businesses, and to prepare to rebuild Los Angeles in a much better way.
But I also knew with the way that the wind was that things could change on a dime.
On Tuesday, Lauren Sincar saw plumes of smoke coming over her house in Malibu. She quickly fled with her husband and watched through their security camera as the flames crept closer and closer before the feed went black. She hasn't been back to her property yet, but neighbors have sent photos that show what remains of her house.
It's been a very strange few days, really surreal at times, and then other times like just deeply devastating. But it hasn't just happened to me, it's happened to so many people. So with that perspective, I think I've been able to sort of carry on, but then there are other moments where I'm like, I have nothing. Like, everything we had is gone, except for the few stupid things that we grabbed on the way out.
They've been staying at a hotel, trying to figure out what comes next and reflecting on the community they've lost.
It's a really paralyzing time right now too. You don't really know which way to go. One of the things that has really kind of hurt my heart a little bit is it seems that people view the Palisades in Malibu as just like an enclave for celebrities who can afford to, use their millions to rebuild in silly places and go about their lives. But my experience of our neighborhood is very different. People that have been there their whole lives, these are real people that have lost everything, that are gonna have a really hard time for the next months and years ahead.
We are getting our first real look at the extent of the devastation here in Pacific Palisades.
Tracy Park represents Pacific Palisades in the Los Angeles City Council.
What happened in the Palisades over the last several days was not unpredictable. We already know when there's a wildfire event, our communication systems go down. We already know that during evacuation processes, we have traffic bottlenecks. So to see those same issues repeat in what has now become the most devastating natural disaster in Los Angeles history is incredibly frustrating.
Park says the LA Fire Department's budget is inadequate for today's needs.
We have about the same number of firefighters and fire stations in the city of Los Angeles that we had 60 years ago, but our demands for service have tripled.
There's 4 million people here.
There's 4 million people in the city of Los Angeles. We have about 100 fire engines and ambulances out of service sitting in the maintenance yard.
Why? Why is this the case?
Because they don't have enough mechanics. And here in the city of Los Angeles, we need at least 62 new fire stations to meet average daily demand in our city. Not 5, not 10, not 25, 62. I hope that this is a wake-up call to all of the leadership in the city of Los Angeles that this chronic underinvestment in critical infrastructure and public safety cannot continue. This has got to be our #1 priority going forward.
With more than 150,000 people still under evacuation orders, LA County Sheriff Robert Luna said a nighttime curfew would resume tonight in those areas.
We're not doing this to inconvenience anybody. We're doing it to protect the structures, the houses that people have left because we ordered them to leave, and I want them to feel confident that we are doing everything we can to secure that.
At least 20 arrests have been made for looting or thefts already, according to the county sheriff. And in addition to local law enforcement, National Guard troops are now patrolling streets. In a briefing today in the Oval Office, President Joe Biden got an update on the fires and said his administration is working with President-elect Trump's team.
They know every single thing we're doing about the response.
Back in Los Angeles, Councilmember Tracy Park laments the future of the Pacific Palisades, since many residents, especially those who were under or uninsured, may never be able to rebuild.
I think the reality here is the Palisades is probably going to look and feel different. That's probably inevitable as people decide whether to rebuild, what to rebuild. And I think it also raises really important questions for our city about densification in areas that are prone to natural disasters.
The Palisades are gone. That is a direct quote from the councilwoman we introduced you to in the piece, and you can see the destruction behind me. Of course, there are a few pockets, even in this neighborhood, where miraculously some homes were completely untouched. But the councilwoman told us there is not a single elementary school in the Pacific Palisades that is still standing. She also said there is not a lot to come back to. The water is unusable and the air is toxic. Amna, back to you.
So many layers of devastation there. And Stephanie, on top of all this, we know California has an insurance crisis, essentially. How does that play into the rebuilding efforts ahead?
There are countless residents in the Pacific Palisades that are either not insured at all or underinsured, and that's because a lot of insurance companies simply refuse to provide fire insurance to homeowners here, knowing this is a high-risk wildfire area. So some residents, including the couple we spoke to this morning, say that they have a California-coordinated insurance plan of last resort. That is a very expensive plan. Not everybody has it, and they are almost sure surely not going to recover enough funds to rebuild. So that is a real concern, what the Pacific Palisades will look like going ahead. The councilwoman said to us that Los Angeles did not have the resources to fight this fire alone, and they will not have the resources to rebuild and recover alone.
Stephanie Sy reporting on those devastating wildfires in California. Stephanie, thank you to you and the team.
Thank you.
Prolonged drought and those powerful Santa Ana winds set up extreme conditions that have fueled those devastating Los Angeles area wildfires. Conditions compounded by climate change. And today, researchers from NOAA and NASA underline that point, releasing analysis showing that 2024 was the hottest year in recorded history, dating back almost 200 years. The 10 warmest years on record have all occurred in the past decade, according to those agencies. To break down the report and its implications, we're joined by Gavin Schmidt. He's the director of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies at NASA. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk first about the wildfires, because wildfires are uncommon in the winter months. So help us understand the conditions, the factors that came together that contributed to these devastating wildfires out in Los Angeles.
So fires need a number of ingredients. So you need to have fuel that's going to burn. You need to have what's called fire weather. That's the dry air and the strong winds that are most conducive to allowing wildfires to spread. And of course, you need an ignition source. And the climate aspect of this is very much in the both in the fuel load and in the fire weather aspects. So in Southern California, we used to think of the late fall as being fire season. Well, now fire season stretches out all year because the temperatures and the evaporative draw, the drying out of the land surface has been increasing as temperatures have increased. And so the other part of that is the fuel load. One of the things that we've been seeing in California is this kind of whiplash between extreme wet events like multiple atmospheric rivers at the beginning of last year, and then extreme dry events. So it hasn't really rained in the Los Angeles area for months now, and that has led to both a spurt of growth when there was water, and then all of that growth has dried out, providing unfortunately a perfect storm for fire this season. And now in the wintertime, when you get these strong Santa Ana winds coming off the cold mountains into the warm basin, those have provided that extra component of fire weather, and we're seeing the results.
If our baseline is changing and these large-scale destructive events are becoming more common, what more can we do to mitigate it?
Well, I mean, we can mitigate things on the long term by reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that we're putting into the atmosphere. Until we do that, temperatures are going to keep rising, and we're going to keep having these announcements about record warm years. And the impacts of that global mean temperature change on intense rainfall, on wildfires, on sea level rise, on heat waves are going to continue to get worse. There are local adaptations that we can do to prevent the worst things. We can build better in the same way that we build better for earthquakes. We can build better for fire-prone environments. We can try and manage things, but a lot of this is unfortunately kind of beyond our control.
Well, as we mentioned, NASA and NOAA released a study today showing that 2024 was the hottest year on record. What story does the data tell, and what are the implications?
Well, the biggest story is the long-term trends. Like, we have warmed roughly 1.5 degrees centigrade, that's about 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit, since the late 19th century, since the mid-19th century. That is about halfway to the Pliocene. And the Pliocene was a period about 3 million years ago when it was about 3 degrees warmer, 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer, and there was no ice in Greenland, and the Arctic forest forests went all the way up to the Arctic Ocean, and sea level was something like 80 feet higher than today. And we have gone up about half that distance in just 150 years. So what our data shows, and it's not just our data, it's everybody's data, is that we are having an impact on the climate. This is not a minor perturbation. This is a very big deal indeed. And that ongoing trend that we can see so clearly in the data that kind of really started in the 1960s and has been relentless and perhaps even increasing in the last few years is abundantly clear.
Quite a warning. Gavin Schmidt, director of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies at NASA. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And we start the day's other headlines in Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro was sworn in for a third six-year term following last year's widely disputed election. Maduro took the presidential oath this morning at the Legislative Palace in Caracas. He declared victory last summer, even though the U.S. and others recognize opposition leader Edmundo Gonzalez as the actual winner. Today, Maduro celebrated what he sees as a legitimate extension of his presidency.
Esta constitución está victoriosa.
This constitution is victorious, and Venezuela is at peace. This act is possible because Venezuela is fully exercising its national sovereignty, its popular sovereignty, and its national independence.
Maduro's swearing in comes a day after key opposition leader Maria Corina Machado was briefly detained during an anti-government protest in Caracas. Today, she posted a video on social media slamming his inauguration.
Hoy, 10 de enero,
Today, Maduro consolidates a coup d'etat in front of Venezuelans and the world. They decided to cross the red line that makes official the violation of the national constitution. They trample on our constitution. Maduro today did not put a sash on his chest. He put it on his ankle like a shackle that will tighten more and more every day.
The U.S. has criticized Machado's detention and today joined Canada, the U.K., and the European Union in announcing a coordinated round of new sanctions on Venezuela. The U.S. also raised the bounty for Maduro's arrest to $25 million. The Biden administration is also extending humanitarian protections for hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans already living in the U.S. They fall under what's called Temporary Protected Status, or TPS, and today the Department of Homeland Security extended their stay for another 18 months. The measure affects about 600,000 Venezuelans, plus 200,000 people from El Salvador, as well as Ukrainians and Sudanese. Officials cited political and economic uncertainty, the dangers of war and weather-related disasters in offering the extensions. President-elect Donald Trump tried to scale back such protections during his first term. The Israeli military says it struck Houthi rebel targets in Yemen today. It comes a day after the Houthis launched drones at Israel. Smoke was seen rising over southern parts of the capital, Sana'a. The Houthis said the strikes came as protesters rallied in support of Palestinians in Gaza. Also today, the Israeli army confirmed that a body it recovered from Gaza was that of hostage Hamza El-Zayadna. Israel says the 23-year-old was found in an underground tunnel earlier this week alongside the body of his father, Yusuf El-Zayadna. They were kidnapped together during Hamas's October 7th attack. The Biden administration announced new sanctions against Russia's energy sector today, hoping to deal a massive blow to its economy over the war in Ukraine. The measures punish two of Russia's largest oil and gas companies, plus energy officials and entities that do business with Russia. They also target a fleet of more than 180 vessels Moscow has used to evade previous sanctions. Officials say they're the most significant such measures to date, costing Russia billions of dollars per month. But they acknowledge it's up to the incoming Trump administration to keep the sanctions or scrap them. More than 80 million Americans are under winter weather alerts tonight as a massive snowstorm pushes across the South. In parts of northwest Arkansas, they're digging out from more than 6 inches of snow. Officials warned of slippery and potentially dangerous roads from Missouri all the way to Atlanta, Georgia. Children there took advantage of canceled classes by going sledding. Schools were closed for millions from Texas through the Carolinas. Meantime, more than 2,000 flights were canceled nationwide. As the storm trudges north and east, North Carolina Governor Josh Stein warned people that travel could be treacherous.
The winter storm will likely hit much of our state. At this time, our greatest concern is road safety. The thawing and refreezing of precipitation leads to ice, so that everyone needs to be careful on our roads.
The storm has already dumped more than a year's worth of snow on cities like Memphis and Little Rock. Part of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast will also see snow this weekend. On Wall Street today, a strong jobs report raised worries about the pace of Fed rate cuts. As a result, the Dow Jones Industrial Average sank nearly 700 points. The Nasdaq lost more than 300 points on the day. The S&P 500 also ended firmly in negative territory. And a violin made by Italian craftsman Antonio Stradivari is estimated to fetch a record price of up to $18 million when it goes to auction next month. The Joachim Maa Stradivarius was crafted in 1714 during what's considered the violin maker's golden period. Its name comes from two of its prior owners, Joseph Joachim and Sihon Maa, both accomplished violinists. Maa gifted the violin to the New England Conservatory in Boston, where he had studied. Proceeds of the sale will go towards student scholarships. Still to come on the NewsHour, the U.S. Supreme Court hears arguments on whether banning TikTok violates the First Amendment. And David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart weigh in on the week's political headlines.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
President-elect Donald Trump was sentenced today in New York City, months after a New York jury found him guilty of 34 felony counts of falsifying business documents to cover up an extramarital affair. But Judge Juan Merchan granted the president-elect what's called an unconditional discharge, a sentence that affirms he is a convicted felon but faces no further penalties, fines, or any time in jail. Our William Brangham was in court in New York this morning and joins us now. So, William, tell us a little bit more about this unconditional discharge. How did Judge Juan Merchan explain his rationale for what some are calling a lenient sentence?
I mean, on one hand, this wasn't a surprise. The judge had telegraphed this in a memo earlier. But yes, this is a relatively rare situation to have a defendant convicted of 34 felony convictions and face no jail time, no penalties, no fines, no probation. Merchan, in describing today, said that on one hand, this was a trial that was very ordinary. It unfolded in an ordinary way. Jury was selected. The lawyers gave their arguments, witnesses were heard, a verdict was reached. But he said, because of the defendant, this was an extraordinary trial, and sentencing him would be the same. Merchan said that if Donald Trump had been a regular citizen, a regular defendant, that he would have likely faced much harsher punishment for those crimes. But because Donald Trump is about to become president of the United States again, that comes with enormous protections, the judge said. Those are granted by the Constitution, many other courts, and most recently interpreted again by the Supreme Court last year. So Merchan argued this was the only course he could really take. But he did say those protections given to the president do not excuse the underlying crime. Let's hear a little bit of what he said today.
To be clear, the protections afforded the office of the president are not a mitigating factor. They do not reduce the seriousness of the crime or justify its commission in any way. The protections are, however, a legal mandate, which, pursuant to the rule of law, this court must respect and follow.
It's an interesting clarification there. And William, we should note that Mr. Trump wasn't in the courtroom today. The judge had given him the option of dialing in remotely, but he was allowed to speak and on the record. So what did he say?
That's right. Donald Trump connected to the courtroom via video link from Mar-a-Lago, sitting next to his lawyer. And Trump said what he has always said about this case, that this was a political witch hunt. It was a completely rigged case against him. He said he is completely innocent of the charges, which he argues are completely bogus. He denies he ever had a relationship with Stormy Daniels. He again falsely blamed collusion between these local prosecutors and the Department of Justice. He said notably that the voters had been the ultimate jury nationwide, and that they had looked at this case and all the other cases against him, and they said they vindicated him. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work.
But William, even facing no penalties, no jail time, no fines, this isn't necessarily a day that Mr. Trump wanted to see happen or thought should happen. Isn't that right?
That's exactly right. He fought this in every legal avenue that he could, as is his right. He appealed it to this judge. He appealed it to an appeals court in New York. He even appealed it this week to the U.S. Supreme Court, which rejected it last night in a 5-4 vote. There was also this very unusual phone call that Donald Trump had with Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito this week. Ostensibly, this was a call about a job referral for a man who is, I guess, being considered for a job in the Trump administration. But many government ethics experts say that to have a sitting Supreme Court justice on the phone with the president-elect on the very same week that he is appealing to them to delay sentencing certainly raises eyebrows. Again, Alito claims that they did not talk about this whatsoever. It had not even been filed at that point when Trump had this conversation. So yes, Trump did not want today to come because until today actually happened, Trump was not legally considered a, quote, convicted felon, and now he is. And that's certainly not any label that an incoming president wants affixed to him right before he enters the White House. The last thing that Judge Merchan said to Donald Trump today was, "Sir, I wish you Godspeed as you assume your second term in office." And with that, Donald Trump's video link disconnected from the courtroom, and that was the end of the day today.
Godspeed indeed. William Brangham reporting from New York City. William, thank you.
Thanks, Amna.
In a matter of days, one of the most popular social media apps in the country could be forced to pull the plug. That's if the Supreme Court doesn't grant it a legal reprieve. John Yang is here to explore TikTok's legal battle and its looming deadline to cut its ties with China.
Jeff, while the justices heard arguments over the looming U.S. TikTok ban inside the court, outside, some influencers gathered on the steps to live stream their support for the platform. There are more than 170 million TikTok users in the United States. That's about half the population. In last year's presidential campaign, both candidates used it to court young voters. But concerns about its Chinese ownership led Congress to pass a law that would ban it in the United States on January 19th unless its parent company sells it. Bobby Allen covers technology for NPR, and Marcia Coyle is PBS News Supreme Court analyst. Bobby, let me start with you. What does this law actually do on the 19th? The TikTok lawyer today kept saying that TikTok would go dark. Is that an overstatement?
Yeah, on January 19th, Apple and Google will be legally forced to remove TikTok from app stores. And that means new users can't download it, and ByteDance in China will not be able to send the app software updates. Also, web hosting services that provide backend support for TikTok will have to sever ties. That means it's not going to have any cloud support. That's going to be a huge problem for all of the people taking videos, commenting, trying to use TikTok, because basically it will cripple TikTok's infrastructure.
And Marcia, in the arguments today, what were the justices focusing on?
John, they were really focused on the two reasons that Congress and the administration have given to justify the law, as Bobby just stated it. That had to do with the fact that the Chinese government, through its very close alignment with ByteDance, the China-based owner of TikTok, may engage in covert content manipulation, as well as its collection of the data of private citizens, Americans, about 177 million Americans and their contacts, and use both of those to undermine national security.
There was also a First Amendment argument, wasn't there?
Well, actually, the guts of this case is whether the law itself violates the First Amendment speech rights of TikTok USA and the users of TikTok. They're called creators, those who put content up on TikTok. And today, during the arguments, it was very interesting because there was a lot of skepticism about the first justification, the Chinese government engaging in manipulation, covert manipulation of content, and whether there actually was a speech interest here to look at. As some of the justices said, and I'll point in particular to Chief Justice Roberts, he said Congress didn't care about the expression on TikTok, meaning the speech or the ideas on TikTok. Congress didn't want to stop TikTok, he said. What Congress wanted to do was to stop China's control of TikTok. So he was very skeptical that there was a speech right here. Also, there were justices who did recognize there were speech rights belonging to TikTok USA and the users of TikTok. But they questioned, for example, Justice Elena Kagan questioned whether those speech impediments or restrictions were really substantial because the law itself, she said, really was targeted at ByteDance and its divestiture.
Were the justices more skeptical of one side or the other? Did they tip their hand at all about what they might do?
Well, I think they were very tough on both sides, but I think what resounded most with the justices was that second interest that the government offered for the law, the collection of the private information of American citizens. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, for example, he said that's a huge concern now and in the future. As the government pointed out, that data, private data, could be used by China in the future to blackmail future CIA officers. It could be used to try to turn certain Americans into spies. And so I think when you looked overall at the arguments, that was something that may persuade a majority to very much uphold this law.
And Bobby, if that happens, if this law is upheld, is there any indication what TikTok and its owners would do as the 19th approaches?
That's really the million-dollar question. And we don't know. TikTok and its parent company ByteDance are in this really precarious amount of uncertainty right now. If the law is upheld, President-elect Donald Trump will not yet be in office. And, between January 19th, the start date, and when Trump is sworn in the 20th, there's going to be 24 hours of limbo. And I have sources inside of Google and inside of Apple who say, look, we've heard from our general counsels that we're not about to be out of compliance with a federal law on the books. So they are planning, the two big tech companies, to remove TikTok on the 19th. And I think a big question is, even if the law is upheld, will Trump then, can he rather, extend the deadline? How do you, this came up in the court today, right? How do you extend the deadline on a ban that has already started? So lots of unknowns, but it could get really serious really fast for TikTok.
And actually, at the end of last year, the president-elect filed a brief in the court asking them to delay this so that he could have time to try to negotiate a deal, as he put it. And is there a chance that he just might, if the law is upheld, he just might not enforce it?
That's a possibility. Trump, remember, was the person who started the TikTok ban movement during his first term, but now coming into office, he wants to be TikTok's savior. And it is within the realm of possibility that he instructs his Justice Department to not enforce this law. If you look at the language of the law Congress passed, it puts a lot of leeway in the hands of the president. The president will be the one who will be interpreting and instructing his administration to enforce the law. So a lot will come down to what is Trump going to do once he's in office, regardless of what the high court decides.
Bobby Allen of NPR, Marcia Coyle, our Supreme Court analyst for PBS News. Thank you both very much.
Thanks for having me,
John.
On Monday, President Biden will give a farewell speech at the State Department focused on his foreign policy legacy. Earlier today, Nick Schifrin sat down with one of the key architects of that foreign policy, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
Jake Sullivan, thanks very much. Welcome back to the NewsHour.
Thanks for having me.
Today, you're imposing the largest sanctions yet on Russia's energy sector, including 2 of Russia's largest oil producers and ships that constitute Russia's shadow fleet that senior officials say will cost Russia billions of dollars per month. Why are you taking this step now, and why didn't you take it sooner?
If we had sanctioned Russia's oil 18 months ago, at a time when oil prices were high, gas prices were high, it would have meant a spike at the pump in a way that would have put pain on working people in the United States. Today, oil prices are much lower. The oil market globally is very well supplied. And so we have an opportunity to hit Putin in his pocketbook without hitting the American people in theirs. What we're giving the incoming team, the incoming administration, is real leverage in a negotiation as they set up for diplomacy.
On that diplomacy today, the Kremlin said that Putin was open to talking to President-elect Trump. Last night, President-elect Trump said that a meeting was being set up. Senior officials tell me that you don't know exactly what Russia actually wants out of any negotiation in Ukraine. So in that sense, is it worthwhile for Trump to have that meeting with Putin?
As long as Ukraine is determining its destiny and we are not dictating Ukraine's destiny for it, then to me, diplomacy very much makes sense.
Today's the third inauguration of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, despite the fact he lost the election. Administration is announcing new sanctions and visa restrictions on Maduro and his team and increasing the reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest or conviction. Why not also cancel the licenses that allow Chevron and other energy companies to operate in Venezuela that provide the regime much of its money?
What we're trying to do is take an approach that really focuses on the bad actors, the individuals who are responsible for the brutality and repression and sham that was the presidential election last year. That form of sanctions, targeted sanctions, rewards against them, is the best way to put the pressure on and try to create a circumstance in which positive change comes to Venezuela.
But if the goal is to put pressure on, surely the best pressure would be to cut off Maduro's main source of income.
Going back multiple administrations, we've been squeezing Venezuela economically, including in their oil sector. That didn't work under President Trump. The kinds of sanctions you're talking about, which were previously in place, didn't have the intended effect.
Maria Corina Machado, the leader of the opposition, was, quote, kidnapped by the regime temporarily yesterday, her team said. What's your warning to the regime about her safety moving forward?
We have communicated to the regime that we expect that she will not be harmed.
You said today that you've taken actions in response to what's known as Salt Typhoon, Chinese hackers who have infiltrated multiple American telecommunications companies. What actions have you taken in response to that when it comes to punishing China?
We've taken actions to make it harder for China to actually be able to execute this. I would just point out that there are 2 forms of threat here. One is what Salt Typhoon. The other is the placement of disruptive malware on critical infrastructure. That could actually lead to physical effects if, in fact, there was a disruptive or destructive cyber attack against an energy grid or a water system or what have you.
Is China today capable of that destructive hit?
We should be concerned about the possibility that there can be actual disruptive or destructive effects.
What warning have you given Beijing not to conduct that kind of attack?
Very directly, at very high levels, we have laid out what would unfold from there in ways that I do think the PRC understands.
Let's move to the Middle East. Negotiators are currently trying to get Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. It would pause the war, release Israeli hostages, Palestinian detainees, and surge humanitarian aid into Gaza. President-elect Trump has threatened, quote, all hell will break out in the Middle East if there isn't a deal before the inauguration. The Trump team believes that language has helped accelerate the talks. Has it?
Well, if we get a deal, everyone and their mother can take credit for it. I'll be happy. Okay, we are close, but we are not there yet.
On Monday night, President Biden will give a speech about his foreign policy legacy, so let's talk about that a little bit. And I want to start in Afghanistan. Do you today sit back and think about how Afghanistan worked out and think maybe I could have done something better?
On the big question, is the United States better off because we are no longer at war in Afghanistan? The answer, I believe, is an emphatic yes. This war would be entering its 25th year with Americans fighting and dying in Afghanistan. And we are much better off that that is not happening. Of course, I think there were things we could have done differently at the time in the execution, but
such as?
when we decided to actually execute the drawdown of the embassy. At the time, we did not want to accelerate the drawdown of the embassy because we didn't want to create a panic that would cause the collapse of the government. And now looking back, the government collapsed anyway, as we said at the time. And so therefore, the obvious conclusion is, even if it runs the risk of inciting that kind of panic, you got to go faster.
Let's talk about legacy in the Middle East. A new Lancet study says today that the death toll cited by Palestinian health authorities, 46,000, is actually a dramatic undercount. Has Israel's response been proportionate?
First, Hamas attacked Israel, killed 1,200 people, the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Then Hamas retreated back behind a civilian population, used hospitals and schools and other civilian facilities for military purposes. Now, that does not lessen their responsibility to minimize civilian harm. For those who say, why not just cut off the weapons to Israel, and then they'll have to do what you say, you've got to remember that sitting in my seat, I was watching Israel get attacked not just by Hamas, but by Hezbollah, by the Houthis, by the Shia militia groups in Iraq and Syria.
Israel says 7 fronts.
And directly by Iran itself. So no, we were not going to leave Israel defenseless against the onslaught of those multiple fronts.
On Ukraine, if you had given Ukraine more weapons before the 2022-2023 winter, when Russia was able to cede those defensive lines in the south before Ukraine's counteroffensive, do you think you might have avoided the war of attrition that Ukraine seems unable to win?
We gave them what they needed at that time to try to continue to press the advantage. And here's what happened. They ran into minefields, massive Russian minefields, and were never able to get through them. Those minefields had been seeded long before this war even began, so obviously we couldn't avoid that. We worked at every stage of this war to put the tools in the hands of brave Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines to be able to defend their country and to try to advance in the face of the Russian defenses. And we believe that in doing so, we helped save this country and thwart Russia's ambition to wipe it off the map.
Looking forward, President-elect Trump the other day seemed to take the NATO security guarantee off the table. Is that wise? Are there other models of security guarantees that you think could create what you've called the just peace for Ukraine?
The critical point is that you can't really have peace unless you have some degree of confidence that Russia can't just turn around and do this all over again down the road. I think if Putin, sitting in the Kremlin, saw the United States basically say, we're done with Ukraine, we've given up, they're on their own, it certainly wouldn't make him more likely to do a deal. So you have in the incoming president someone who cares very much about the art of the deal, has literally written the book on it, and good deals mean leverage. Leverage means staying power. Staying power means continuing to support Ukraine.
You helped fashion the foreign policy for the middle class, to use your phrase. Is the fact that the middle class in the election appeared to be more concerned about inflation and didn't choose Kamala Harris, do you believe that that's a sign that at the very least the argument that you have been making for 4 years didn't take hold among a certain part of the electorate?
President Biden's investments in our manufacturing and innovation base, his investments in protecting the United States against unfair Chinese economic practices, his protection of American technology so it can't be used against us by China or any other adversary. These are steps that will play out over the course of a decade or more. The clock on those and the clock on an election were not entirely aligned.
What do you wish you had more time to have accomplished?
The list of that is very long, but I asked myself some just pretty simple questions. Are our alliances stronger than we found them 4 years ago? Yes. Are our enemies and competitors weaker than when we found them 4 years ago? Yes. Have we kept the United States out of war? Yes. Are the basic foundations of American power more robust and resilient today than 4 years ago? Yes. So I believe we are handing off a very strong hand to the next team.
Jake Sullivan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
From a day of remembrance for President Carter to President-elect Trump being sentenced in court, we turn now to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That's New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for The Washington Post. It's good to see you both on this Friday. So President-elect Donald Trump received the first ever criminal sentence for a former or incoming American president, a so-called unconditional discharge in his criminal hush money case. David, we are living in this era where the word unprecedented has been worn down to a cliche. Still, what should we make of the fact that Donald Trump will be the first president to take office with a criminal conviction?
I thought it was the right solution. Trump wanted the whole thing wiped out, the court and trial wiped out. Some of his opponents wanted him to go to jail. But, in our country, we respect the will of the voters. The presidency, under the Constitution, at least as interpreted by the Supreme Court, has protections. We do not want to live in a society where presidents face possible prosecution for the things they do while in office or even in the periphery of their office. And so I thought convicting him, making him a felon, I think he can't own a gun. There are a few restrictions there, but not sending him to jail, that struck me as a balance between the needs of the legal system and the needs of our democracy.
Donald Trump is vowing to appeal this conviction. We'll see what comes of that. But after, being convicted of 34 felonies, there are people who look at this case and they say that, Donald Trump walks away with a punishment that is less than what one would receive for a speeding ticket.
Look, this case, this hush money case, was the case that everybody said was the crappy case. Of the four, remember, Donald Trump was indicted 4 times, and this one was the least important, the shakiest, and yet it's the one case where Donald Trump was held accountable. The one case where he was brought to trial before a jury of his peers in his hometown of New York City and was found guilty 34 times. I think that is great punishment. What's also great punishment is the sentencing today, where the judge said, you're going to be president, you're not going to go to jail, but you're a convicted felon. And so for the rest of his life, any story written about him will have to mention the fact that he is a convicted felon. If not on the first reference, definitely by the second reference. And that is fitting, that is right, that is just. Do I wish the other 3 cases had gone to trial and that he had faced accountability on those? Yes, but this will do.
It's also striking the proximity of the sentencing and the inauguration, that on January 10th, Donald Trump is a defendant subject to a judge and a jury verdict. And 10 days from now, he will in many ways become the guardian of the nation's laws as he assumes all the powers of the presidency. How does that strike you?
Odd. Yeah, he's a precedent setter in all sorts of bad ways. And so he's, I think, probably guilty on all these 4 different cases. He's someone who doesn't respect the law. And so I guess it makes me think, if he's someone who regards the presidency as a piece of personal property and is not willing to abide by the code of ethics and the code of law we surround the presidency with, what's coming in the second term? And so we shall see.
But, and to that point, keep in mind who's going into the Justice Department with him in this second term. The lawyer who was in court with him today for his sentencing. All of his personal lawyers are in the top positions of the Justice Department.
There was that rare show of independence yesterday from the Supreme Court where we saw the Chief Justice John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett side with the liberals in that ruling that allowed the sentencing to move forward. It is a risk to read too closely into any one Supreme Court ruling. That won't stop me from asking the question. What can we learn, if anything, about the way the court ruled in this case and what it suggests about other cases involving Donald Trump?
Well, I think John Roberts, somebody once said to me he could have been the greatest Supreme Court Chief Justice, or one of the greats in history, if he only had a court behind him. And he does not. So he's sort of a lone operator. Amy Coney Barrett has repeatedly shown some distance sometimes between her and Donald Trump. I think if the Kavanaugh hearings had not gone the way the hearings, Brett Kavanaugh may have shown some difference. But especially with Coney Barrett and Roberts, you have justices who are quite willing to not toe the Trump line every single time.
Well, in addition to vowing to make good on his campaign promise to make America great again, he also apparently, the president-elect, wants to make America bigger. He has talked about obtaining Greenland from Denmark. He wants to reclaim the Panama Canal from Panama. He wants to turn Canada into the 51st state. This is in addition to wanting to rename the Gulf of Mexico. It's not clear how serious he is about any of these things. Of course, he talked about trying to take Greenland in the first administration. What should we make of any of this, Jonathan?
Look, I'm going to take a page out of Rachel Maddow's book from the first Trump term, which was, don't listen so much to what they say, pay attention to what they do. So he can talk all sorts of smack about Greenland and Gulf of America and making Canada the 51st state. But until he actually does something, if he does try to take Greenland, if he does try to rename the Gulf of Mexico, if he does try to act on these things he's talking about, then I will take him seriously. I mean, this is the thing I learned from the first Trump term. We'll drive ourselves crazy if we react to everything that he says. I'm going to pay attention to what he does.
The outgoing Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in an interview said that this is just all a distraction. Take a listen to what he said.
President Trump, who's a very skillful negotiator, is getting people to be somewhat distracted by that conversation, to take away from the conversation around 25% tariffs on oil and gas and electricity and steel and aluminum and lumber and concrete.
There are plenty of reasons for the U.S. to be interested in Greenland, for instance, given all of the mineral resources there and the fact that China dominates, rare earth mineral production. But is this a distraction?
Well, the talk of invading Greenland is a distraction, like invading Quebec. Are we going to invade Quebec? No, I don't think so. And it should be said that Greenland is super more important because of climate change and because a lot of the navigational lanes that go through there. But Denmark, which has strong influence and co-ownership on Greenland, they've been wonderful to the U.S. They've made sure all our interests are protected. And so we have no beef with Greenland. Same with Panama, frankly. Of course, it would be a problem if the U.S. couldn't use the Panama Canal. But Panama has operated completely professionally, no bias toward China, no bias away from the U.S. So as usual, there's no problem here. Justin Trudeau is absolutely right, though. These things are to the side. The tariffs are real. The tariff proposal, that's an actual proposal. And declaring a trade war on our two closest allies and neighbors is a cataclysmic policy. And whether we actually go ahead and impose tariffs on Canada, which like one of our main allies in trading, that really there's a reason Justin Trudeau on the way out is confronting that, because that really is the catastrophe in front of us.
I'm going to wrap up our conversation with your reflections on the state funeral yesterday for the late President Jimmy Carter. Some historians have argued, Jonathan, that Carter was misunderstood and underappreciated. How do you see it?
Well, that's the beauty of being out of the White House and having time in history build up around you and change the way people look at your presidency. And he lived to 100 years old, so he got to see 40 years worth of reinterpretation of his presidency while he was still alive. I think the funeral yesterday is like Washington's version of like a Real Housewives reunion, harkening back to a more genteel time, even though Donald Trump was there. But you have all these people who are upholding institutions, upholding civility, and honoring a former president who, when he left Washington, was reviled, was not popular at all. And yet there in the National Cathedral, we saw official Washington and all of his living predecessors be there to honor him in that way.
That's right, the 5 current and former presidents all there to honor one of their own. Lots of interactions to parse. We have a sort of an assemblage of them here. We have Mike Pence and Donald Trump, Trump and Obama. There was George W. Bush as he greeted the former president. There, you see it right there. How does all of that strike you?
Boom. It was like watching one of these Russian novels, like, oh, there's Count Vronsky is at the ball, and so is Count Volkovsky, and there's Anna Karenina, she's also here. It was like 30 years of our political lives in one room. And you think of all the drama between them, and I'm just talking about the Clintons, the Obamas, all the internecine, the Pence. It really was. It was like a dramatic novel. But there is, as Jonathan said, a bit of nostalgia as we look back. And I think about this all the time, was the 70s worse or better than now? And I would say on matters of crime, of divorce rates, of societal breakdown, the 70s were worse. But they did have Republican senators who would go to Richard Nixon in the 70s and say, you need to resign. They did have a political leadership class that is better than our class right now.
David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, thanks as always.
Thanks, Jeff.
Be sure to watch Washington Week with The Atlantic tonight here on PBS. Moderator Jeffrey Goldberg and his panel discuss how Donald Trump's recent threats against allies is giving new meaning to America First.
And on PBS News Weekend, the chemical found in homes, schools, and businesses that the EPA now says presents an unreasonable risk to human health. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us, and have a great weekend.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.